Awesome. I always see your background and I'm like, oh, I want to be there. It's sunny.
Me too. Although this would have been what, I guess 6 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah, Carolyn's place there's just down the road from Ted's mountain retreat there.
Yeah.
They're neighbors.
I know this is where I want to be, not where I am.
Yeah.
All right, Clint should be here momentarily. Just got a message from him. We are streaming, so let me share my screen. Awesome. Okay, so can you guys see the slide deck?
I can.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another episode of SEO Fight Club. Clint Butler should be joining us shortly. He's just running a couple minutes behind, so I figure we'll get started on some of the boilerplate. Obviously, we'll have to come back to the SEO this week stuff. Big milestone. Dre's show hit 1,000 subscribers. So I'm really happy for him. That's a great milestone. If you think about it, when you have 1,000 people listening to what you do on a regular basis, that's kind of like being the most popular person in your town if you live in a smaller town, or the most popular person at your university, or at least one of them, among the sports stars of a university. That's really impressive, and I know that most people are like, well, I watch Mr. Beast and he has 40 million followers. Well, you got to start somewhere, and 1,000 is a great place to start. So I want to thank everybody that supported him and getting to that milestone. And I hope you continue to support him. It looks like he has amazing interviews lined up. So, thank you. And, he started this project as part of an IMG mastermind we did. And he said, you know what? I want to start a YouTube show. And that's why we've been promoting him, is, he just wanted to do it, and he rolled up his sleeves and he did it. And so I'm glad that we got to be a part of that. Cool. So Clint just joined us. I'll back up to the SEO this week slide. Clint, what's new on SEO this week?
Nothing. No shoot. I didn't do a show this week. So
oh, you lazy bastard. So you're coming back, though. You haven't shut down for good, right?
No, I just got busy doing other stuff. Real life happens. So
yeah, that happens once in a while. So if you haven't checked out his show, it's a really awesome show. He's been doing live audits. He's been reviewing tools. He's been interviewing people. He sometimes covers the news. Not as much as he did in the past, but, he listened to his audience and he's given them the content they want. So if you want an SEO show where people listen to what you want, don't be here. You got to go over there. But yeah, check it out. It's really cool. So, Lauren, what's going on with IMG? I hear things are just going nuts over there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's been great. We're loving seeing all the new members. And tomorrow we have an SEO mastermind test review, which means all the testers are going to get together and 5 tests are going to be reviewed, which is really cool because you can see how these are actually going to be implemented if you wanted to see what to do with the test. So I really encourage our new members to get in there. And if you're not a new member, become one. We have a pro tip coming on Friday, and then on Tuesday we have an AMA with Ted, and those are always just awesome.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about, just come prepared with questions. If there's not enough questions, we just pick topics to talk to talk about. So even if you don't have specific questions, but you just want to learn about some topic within SEO, just come hang out. It's okay to be a fly on the wall too if you just want to listen in. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
So we have this topic. It's kind of a continuation of how can we tease data out of Google, but this time it's coming from Lee Witcher, who was looking into keyword data from the keyword planner. And Lee, you want to tell us a bit about this topic?
Yeah, I think the broad overview is that we were talking last year about teasing stuff out of the data, and I was sharing, there's some ways of sort of correcting for errors potentially in some of the data we get out of the keyword planner, and this show started out with that and then evolved as we were as Ted and I were staring at a lot of spreadsheets and things like that. Some other interesting topics came up, so. We're going to do a few little looks at keyword data here today. So we'll start with a simple one. We get a lot of data out of Google's keyword planner, and sometimes when you're looking at it, it doesn't make sense. So for example, here, I took a look at, plumber, a number of different cities. And if you look at the top, like, your top two cities there, Los Angeles and Houston, one's about twice the size of the other. The keyword volume, it doesn't look like it ought to be correct. It looked like, Los Angeles should have twice as much as Houston. You get down in the gray block there, you got a number of cities at about the same population that have wildly different keyword volume estimates. And you go a little further down, looking at, Richmond and Montgomery. They don't use plumbers, apparently. Richmond, they use them a lot. And then when you look down, go ahead.
So could that be like naturally occurring data? Could it be that the plumbing is just so much better in Montgomery that it never breaks?
Well, I've learned never to say never, but it does not seem plausible.
Or maybe Richmond has the crappiest plumbing on earth, so if you go there, your toilet's going to explode. They make
maybe, but if you look at like Manchester, New Hampshire, 110,000 uses, searches for plumbers more than Los Angeles, a city of 4 million. I mean, these sort of relationships just do not make sense. And then a lot of times you'll find zeros in the data. You're like, oh, they don't do plumbing in this city. So, that's kind of a problem. And, a while back, I came up with a method for, somewhat correcting this. If we go to the next slide, plumbing, is one of those things that ought to correlate somewhat with population. And I understand there can be differences in cities based on the age of the homes and things like that. Time of the year can also come into play. But, if we look at it, something like this ought to correlate with population. So if we look at the correlation between the search volume for the top 1,000 US cities and the population, the correlation is 0.58, which is a big, big number with a data set this large. So, there is a strong relationship there. It's just off on a little city by city basis. So I thought, well, why don't we just use this and correct the data? Get a better estimate just using, what is the average across all cities. So if you go to the next slide, Ted. So you take the top 1,000 cities, you run your keyword planner data for that, and then you just take the total volume for all 1,000 cities, the total population, and you find out it's just over 3 searches monthly for every 1,000 residents. So you can take that multiplier then and apply it to the data. So if we go to the next slide, you can see what it looks like. So Los Angeles should have about 11,000 searches a month rather than the 2,400 that's being reported. That makes more sense. If you look across all the cities, it should look a little bit more like this.
So you're basically figuring out what to expect based on that population. So now this is what we would expect to see, which looks like a natural curve, versus this data, which looks like it has gaps and issues.
Exactly. So if you're looking down like Montgomery down there, it was 30 before. There should be about 600 searches a month. And, if you're doing something like local work and you're trying either for a client or you're doing some sort of rank and rent play, and you look at that 30 and say, oh, I better stay out of Montgomery. There's no search volume there. And with respect to Kyle, you don't want to go through and actually do a PPC test in every city to see what the search volume is, because that gets a little expensive. This is one way of doing it. And I found that with cities and terms that I've looked at, this is a reasonable estimate. I haven't done it across thousands of cities or anything like that, but it should be a reasonable estimate to correct for it. And opportunities are easier to spot there as well. So, Manchester, probably not 2,900 a month there at the bottom. Probably a little closer to 300. So, you don't sit there and say, oh, I'm going to get rich in Manchester. It's that kind of a thing. So,
But like you mentioned before, there can be some seasonal effect. Like I'd imagine in places where water pipes can freeze.
mm-hmm.
In the springtime, you get a bit of a bump and people needing plumbing repairs, versus say like San Diego, where the plumbing will never freeze.
You can have those sort of seasonal effects, but it's also you have to think about plumbing's year round. I mean, it's one of the things we learned in COVID when everybody stayed home and, people ran out of toilet paper and started using, other, paper towels and things like that and getting clogs. Plumbing's not going to go away. So the type of plumbing can change by location, but the need for plumbers, should be fairly stable over time, I would think. So that's this one. Any questions? Let's go back. Any questions on that?
Lee, just for anybody that missed it, how did you come up with the multiplier or the divider, if you will, to make that adjustment?
So if you see the population numbers, the 3 million, 2 million, 1.5, 1.5, yeah, I have 1,000 of those, and I added all of those up, added up the search volume for all of those, and just divided the two. So, you take over a larger data set, the average should be accurate, whereas on any set of cities or any small subset, it shouldn't be there. So, this kind of corrects for the sort of the bucket estimates that Google gives you. They have certain numbers that they tend to pin regularly, and you can see that here, 390, 390, 720, those sort of things tend to appear over and over again. So, even if they put them in the right buckets, there's a difference when you have a lot of the stuff in Keyword Planner comes out as like 1,000 to 10,000. Whether it's closer to 1,000 or closer to 10,000 may determine whether I go after the keyword or not, for example. So,
yeah. And this all stems from the fact that the Keyword Planner search volume already correlated very strongly with population, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we're just filling in the gaps in the data where we saw that their search volume was just missing.
Yeah. So, I mean, the expected is not necessarily a guarantee, because there can be other seasonal, there can be other, the age of a particular city, the weather patterns there, things like that can create different situations. You can't correct for those, but at least it's a better estimate. And so if you go to the next slide, here's another one. It's another city or another industry. I just said massage. If you look across those, we corrected for those. The correlation again on this one was a 0.59 for that before. The outlier in this data is interesting. Las Vegas, huge amount of searches relative to the expected. And that might actually be true because, the heavy reliance on tourism. But Laredo, Texas, a 250,000 people, nobody gets a massage. It's just, buckle up, get back to work. No.
Yeah, they're tough there. They don't do massages in Laredo.
It may be, but I'm looking around at some of the other, like Tyler, Texas. They get massages there. Plano, there's Frisco, Texas. They get massages everywhere. I've been to Laredo. I don't think they're quite that tough, but they are a hardy people, but not a zero on the search volume. That's an outlier there. So, if you looked at that, the expected of about 1,600 a month is probably a more reasonable estimate, for something along those lines. And if you look up and down, from Plano, San Bernardino, Montgomery, Grand Rapids, you can kind of see, some of the averages, if you averaged across those clusters, actually does come in around those numbers. So, there's reasons to feel good about that sort of data.
Lee, one more time.
Sure.
Can you speak slowly for us math illiterate folks? Because you were like, "Oh, I added these two things together and divided this, and that's how I came out with the number." And I'm like, "What the fuck did you just say?"
Okay. So if I have 1,000 cities right here, and let's say the total population across the 1,000 cities is something on the order of 50 million. And then I take the search volume, and the search volume, let's say, is 50,000. You just divide those two things to figure out the relationship, how many searches you get per 1,000, and then you just multiply it back by the population to get the expected. Does that make sense?
So 50 million divided by 50,000 gives you that multiplier, and then you go back and take that multiplier for each city.
For each population. So, if I was doing this right here, looking at the first three examples, Massage, San Jose, Memphis, and Las Vegas, there's about 25,000 as a population, as a search volume is 25,000. You've got about 2.2 million, 2.1 million. So I'd divide 25,000 divided by 2.1 million. And then that number I would apply towards multiply times every one of these populations to get the expected estimate.
Do you need to do 1,000 each time, or can you just do 100?
You can probably do 100. I just was doing it with the larger data sets because I was playing with them. I think when I looked at it, if I'm doing the top 100 cities, it gives you a reasonable estimate. They're pretty damn close, so you don't need 1 million data points by any stretch, but I just happen to be dealing with the top 1,000 cities. So let's move to the next slide, Ted. So I was showing some of this data and some other things, Ted. I said, I think it might be interesting to show that on Fight Club, help some people out, with correcting for some of this. And as we were looking at some of the other data that I had along with it, we started to notice some wild things in the data. So we came up with, two questions that we're kind of exploring, which is how widely does Google's search volume swing? And are Google's estimates off, randomly, or, is there some systematic pattern that it's off? Is this a bug that applies across the board, or, are they manipulating specific things? So we started to dive a little bit down into that. So if we go to the next slide. I had a data set of 1,000, I think it's like 3,000 keywords, and I looked at it a year ago, and then I reran the data the other day, and I looked at the differences in search volume. So left and right, you have the big gainers and big losers. So for example, video, there on line one, video on line one, last summer, a little over 12 months ago, it was showing 20,400,000 search volume for that term. Now it's 45 million is the search volume they're reporting, a change of 25 million. So that's a big swing in 1 year. Now, some of the swings make sense. Some of them you can explain due to COVID. Like there are some travel terms that are down significantly. But if you're looking at big gainers like liquor store, we went from 2.2 million to 6 million. It's been a rough year. We care more about chiropractors, than we did last year, a lot more. Donuts. I don't know why we care more about donuts this year than last year. And psychologists. I mean, psychologists make sense, given the current environment. On the other side, looking at restaurants dropping from 37 million last year to 2 million, that does not seem correct to me, because on a city by city basis, we get more than 2 million search volume. So that one may be understated, even though it's dropped. We don't do anything with uninterruptible power supplies. And now as we are drinking more, Alcoholics Anonymous, we could care less about. And then ear, nose, and throat. There are medical specialties that have gone up and down in this. So it's really interesting just to sort of look at the data and say, all right, I can see some of this. Does it make sense? Is it true? So, I mean, it was just interesting to see the swings. And this is just some of the samples in the data. This is not, all of it, because there's a lot of keywords that we had. So any questions about this or any observations or?
So you're just kind of showing us that there are these, like, sometimes explainable swings, but sometimes not explainable.
Yeah.
Like the ear, nose, and throat doctor. I mean, that can go up and down a little bit, but that shouldn't go up and down by 99%.
I wouldn't think so, but
Now, I'm most impressed that none of them are the same. You would have to have, even accidentally, some that are the same.
You do have, in the data, you do have some that are the same year to year. I was just looking at the biggest gainers and biggest losers, just a sample of them across all the stuff, because there are some things that are the similar, like, there are more psychologist terms than just that one. There are more restaurant terms, obviously, hotel near me, these sort of searches. So this is just sort of a sampling to show, how wildly the stuff can swing at the top and the bottom. So I was picking some that had large percentage gains, and obviously if something moved from 50 searches last year to 20 searches this year, we don't really care, even though on a percentage basis it's a big deal. So that was one of the swings that we noticed in the data. So let's go to the next slide, Ted. But even when you look at a specific industry like personal injury lawyer, not exactly one that's there. So we looked at here the top cities. This is the data that came out, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday of this week. The search volume is what comes out of the keyword planner. So like for New York, 2,900 is what it's showing. But if you look across the monthly data that it also pulls out, you can see that last year it was 1,600. And then in November, it was 5,400 searches a month. So you can see some interesting unexplainable patterns here, like why in Los Angeles has personal injury lawyer searches almost quadrupled in 12 months.
Is it possible that November is slip on the ice season
in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I guess not.
We did it in Detroit, maybe, you could see that, but Detroit actually has gone down. It's Detroit second up from the bottom. So, it's been 320, 260 all the way down the line. So, there's things that don't make sense. And, Chicago's got to be the nicest city in the world. Nobody ever gets injured or nobody ever sues for an injury. Love that town.
Yeah. Chicago's always been that way. They're so nice.
So you have to wonder, about the data. Now, the one thing that's interesting in this, if you look at the average that they show across the 12 months, it is pretty close to what they show as the search volume buckets. But looking across those, they don't make sense, that there should be, these weird spikes and falls in search volume on a monthly basis. It's almost like, we're making shit up every month, but on average, this is what we're going to show you, the average of the shit that we made up on a monthly basis. Or maybe there are nicest people in the world in Chicago, Houston, and Phoenix. Kyle, you lived in Phoenix.
That is right.
Anybody get injured there?
That is correct. Nicest people.
Nicest people. Excellent. So that's kind of that's another way of looking at some of the volatility and, so a little weirdness in the data. So let's move on to the next slide, Ted. So I said, all right, is there another way to validate? I mean, with some, like with local data, we can validate with population. With other data, can we validate another way? So I started looking at Bing data. Now, in the US market, Bing has significant volume. Worldwide, Bing is nothing. Almost all of the worldwide Bing data comes from the US market. The results as of last month from Statista or whatever gave roughly these numbers, 62, 36, and 2% for others. But there are significant demographic differences and things, so you can't just apply a straight like 2-to-1 sort of relationship across all keywords. So what I did was I looked at the search volume correlation between Bing and Google. 0.467. It's pretty good number for our set of 1,000 keywords. Now, this is not 1,000 local. This is 1,000 off of the other data set. So that's a pretty good number. So let's take a look at some of the details. Next slide. So these are just some hand-picked things that Ted and I started noticing when we were just scrolling through a spreadsheet full of data. There are times when, like, debt consolidation is a good number right there. Bing and Google are about the same search volume. It's a different thing. But if you get down to like personal injury attorney, Google searches. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, still on this debt consolidation. So they have like 94% the same search volume.
Right.
But it's interesting that the estimated cost per click is so different.
Yes. Bing is a lot cheaper than Google is. Bing is a lot cheaper than Google is.
So if we're assuming that both Google and Bing are being completely honest and telling the truth, then this is a heck of a deal because you get the same opportunity at a fraction of the cost, right?
Yes, that would be
true. That's assuming no foul play, that Google is being totally honest.
And Bing is being totally honest.
And Bing.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to check that.
But if you look across these, like personal injury is the next one. Bing has, a whole lot more there. That makes no sense. Accident attorney, it's almost 4 times the number, the one down below.
We're going way too fast here because Bing has more search volume for personal injury attorney, and the cost per click on Google is $168 per click, but it's $2.20 on Bing.
Mm-hmm.
So you get more volume on Bing, and it's like at 1% of the Google cost.
Right.
All right. So if they're being totally honest, would you be insane to not look at Bing for this keyword?
Yeah, that's one interpretation of it. There's opportunity there, but when you look across these particular numbers, demographics would not explain this, because if you're looking at accident attorneys, you say, oh, older people get in more accidents or something. Well, Google has more older people. There are demographic differences, but not enough to explain these numbers. So something is amiss.
So either Google is understating their volume or Bing is overstating their volume.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they're both playing games.
Right. But there's... go ahead.
So if we were to just think in our mind, why would Google understate their volume? Is it possible that, based on supply and demand, if they hide a bunch of volume, that might spur on some demand, drive up bids?
Absolutely. If you brought the cost per click down, the search volume down, then people would have to bid more, on the cost per click side. You could also assume that Google is a good, kind, loving, benevolent search engine that sits there and says, okay, those son of a bleep SEOs will go after these terms, so we want to dissuade them by saying there's not as much opportunity there for the good of all mankind and for the cleanliness of search.
And likewise, Bing could possibly have a motivation, say they don't have enough volume, but they want to convince people that they're worthy of investment, so maybe they would inflate the other way?
Yes, that is entirely possible.
Do you know if that's just Bing or Bing and all their search partners? Because Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, all those things all use Bing. So
yeah, we pulled the data across their search partners as well. So it's not just strictly Bing, because Bing, the Bing search results they do drive, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, and a whole bunch of it. There's like a dozen other search engines that amount to about 1% of the search volume. But yeah, we did look across those.
And Google also has search partners, because I've seen syndicated search on laptops, startups. They also have syndicated search through other search engines. And so there's some of that on both sides as well.
Yeah, but one of the patterns that we noticed when we were looking in the data, so if we go to the next slide real quick.
One
Go
thing
ahead, back up.
was just that one other explanation for Google is that they have more than enough people bidding for certain terms, and so they would reduce volume to dissuade bids and steer their data towards something that they have higher inventory on that they want to sell more of.
That's
Well,
true as well,
but
yeah.
that's a form of market manipulation.
Oh, sure. What I'm saying is like something that they could be showing isn't just to dissuade SEOs, but to get people to buy inventory that they have to sell.
Sure.
Okay, that's an interesting point. We may want to come back to that.
So if you go to the next one, in our data set, there seemed to be a pattern. When you look at the cost per click, the higher the cost per click, the more likely it was that Bing would show higher search volume. So again, Bing could be overstating their volume. Google could be understating their volume.
Okay, so explain these two middle columns so we understand what we're looking at.
All right, so in our data set of 1,000, a little over 1,000 keywords, there were 15 keywords that had a $50 plus cost per click on Google. Bing had higher search volume on 7 of those. So 46% of the time when the cost per click was above $50, Bing had a higher search volume.
And so when we go to a different price bracket, that changes. So it looks like Bing has higher search volume whenever the cost per click is higher.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, which way is that going? Is Google systematically suppressing search volume? Is Bing overstating it? Are they doing this lovely dance together?
So that's an interesting pattern because it looks like they're coordinating.
Collusion among competitors? Interesting. So Google is trying to drive volume to Bing. I find that one hard to buy.
Well, they're a very kind company,
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. John Mueller said that, in fact, I think. So that was kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So then Ted says to me, he goes, ooh, hey, Benford's law applies here. So I'm like, what? So I looked it up. Next slide, Ted.
It's really easy.
I looked at that and I said, makes perfect sense.
So Benford's law is this thing that's it's a mathematical law, and it is so powerful that it's admissible in court as evidence. It's used by forensic accountants to figure out when people are cooking the books. So that's its kind of reason for being. And the way it was discovered is mathematicians were using these log books back before computers to figure out the log of a number. And they found that they burned through, the early pages in the book much faster than they'd burn through the later pages in the book with just wear and tear. And they're like, why are we looking up the log of 1 so much more frequently than we look up the log of 7? And so they're trying to figure that out, and that's when they discovered Benford's law.
So
And
go to the next slide while you keep talking, Ted.
Okay, and so what this law says is that when you have naturally occurring numbers like people's heights or how much revenue you sold in a month, or the average weight of people, or whenever you have natural data sets, it all adheres to Benford's law. And what that means is that the first number, the first digit in those numbers is going to follow this pattern, that 1s will be more common than 2s for just the first digit in the numbers. 2s will be more common than 3s. 3s will be more common than 4s, and so on. And so everything in nature that's naturally occurring data adheres to Benford's law. And so when we look at those first digits, we expect them to be about 30% begin with 1s, about 17.6 begin with 2s, and so on. And so when accountants try to find fraud in accounting books, they run this analysis, because if you're making up your numbers, it's not going to adhere to Benford's law. And so we're like, let's run Benford's on these search volumes.
So if we look at the next slide, say, does Bing follow Benford's law? Hey, that's pretty close right
That's
there.
pretty good.
If you look at their search volume, and if you run the mathematical confidence intervals, yeah, it's 91% sure that this is a naturally occurring data set. So that was pretty good. So do people have questions about this?
Yeah, it's an interesting tool, and we're not entirely sure if Benford should apply to search volume. We think it should, but we're not forensic accountants. But we are just having a blast running this analysis.
Yeah, so there's conditions where it says that it should and it shouldn't, and we note a little bit of that. So what about Google? Let's go to the next slide. Does Google follow Benford's law? No.
Uh-oh.
Pattern's not natural. There are some things that occur way more than they should and way less than they should. Now,
and this is across all your data, right?
Yeah, this is across the 1,002 keywords that we ran this analysis on. So some of that might be explained because they bucket stuff. So when you see 2,400, 2,400, 880, 880, 880, those sort of things appear over and over again. So that might explain some of this.
Now I have a problem with that explaining some of it, and that is Benford's law only applies to the first digit. It assumes one significant figure. So we're only looking at the first number. If they quantize the whole rest of the traffic score, that shouldn't affect Benford's. Mm-hmm. We're assuming they have one significant digit, and the most important one to get right should be that first one.
Right. So that is the challenge on this particular one, but it doesn't look like it follows. So let's break this up. We'll break it up a little bit further. So we go to the next slide. We said, let's look at the stuff that's under $20. That's 920 out of the 1,000. That looks, good in terms of it's still closer than not. But then when we look at the high CPC terms.
Okay, so these are all the cheap keywords. There's still a little bit of funny business. Mm-hmm. But it's in the middle, it's funny business in the 4s, 5s, and 6s.
Right. If you look at $20 plus, it's not even close.
So the high CPC keywords look like they're being cooked.
Right. So when you look at some of the, like if you go back, if we're thinking about the earlier slides, there's no personal injury data in Chicago. That's not true, If you look at, Bing and Google being off, they run sort of in parallel, but they're off a little bit. Bing looks like it conforms to natural stuff. Google does not. So it looks like Google is manipulating, and they're manipulating much more at the high end than the low end.
What I find so interesting is that, when you look at these distributions, it's like, okay, some are inflated, but what went away? They got rid of a bunch of ones. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can't explain that. It's just weird.
Yeah, the 4s and 5s are twice what they should be. Those kind of things. It's just, there's nothing about this that conforms. The chance of this, I think when we ran the math, the chance of this conforming to a natural thing was less than 1 in, I don't know, there was 10,000. It was like 1 in 10,000 chance of this being
just a weird natural occurrence.
A weird natural outlier. Yeah, exactly. So we would say no, this is nowhere near Benford's.
Now, what does this really mean? Does this mean Google's done something illegal or wrong? Probably not. and we don't really know. We're not forensic accountants, but it was fun looking at this analysis to see where are the numbers getting unnatural. And it was interesting to see that Bing's numbers adhered to Benford's law, but it's Google's numbers, particularly in the high CPC, that don't.
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, sort of the couple of takeaways on this, as you said, the data is errant, and but there are methods, like we've shown 2 different methods you can use to sort of correct. If you're doing local stuff, you can sort of get a population data to sort of get a better estimate. If you're using some broad terms that are decent sized industries, Bing has got some numbers that you can compare to see, is it likely to be accurate? Are they overstated? Are they understated? There should be a relationship there that is explainable. There's no reason why there are 4 times the number of personal injury requests for Bing than Google. I mean, clearly I would say that's off.
Well, and if we assume that there's truth in, to some extent in both of their numbers, and you're in the US doing SEO for a personal injury attorney, you might want to consider doing some Bing SEO and some Bing pay-per-click, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Bing SEO is different than Google, but I would certainly look at Bing pay-per-click. That's another way of, validating that to see if, that's a good thing. So I know some people listening here today have some personal injury clients that, it might be worth a trip over to Microsoft Ads to see if the data is actually there and the click volume is reasonable.
And I know that, Clint, you've advocated for Bing SEO for a long, long time. This kind of validates everything you've said for years.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a big deal. It's interesting to see. I wonder how many people will actually take advantage of it and all the hard work you guys did.
I mean, the difference between $1 cost per click and a $200 cost per click. I mean, if that's not reason enough, if they're even roughly in the same ballpark of what they state. I mean, that's huge opportunity.
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun doing this. I mean, like I said, we started out with what can you tease out of the data? And I said, you know what, I've got a method for correcting in local that might be interesting to see. And then when we started staring at some of the spreadsheets that I was going through for some other analysis, we're like, hey, there's a lot of cool stuff here. So we could do, a number of different looks at keyword data. But, so a lot of it doesn't make sense, but there's a couple of methods here for trying to make sense of it.
Yeah, and if both of these players are being totally honest, so if we just make the assumption, don't accuse anybody of any wrongdoing, they're being totally honest, I mean, that's like the biggest Black Friday sale on traffic ever. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was blown away by this analysis. Like I know a lot of it went over people's heads, but either something's not right or we've been neglecting Bing for way too long in the US markets.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, one of the things you said earlier about, Clint doesn't report the news, and that's because Clint is the news. That's what we've learned. He's been on the Bing fan train since I first became aware of Clint. It's like, he's like, and Dublin Core, it's like, so he's been there for a while.
Yeah, I think Clint is either bored or he's sitting there going, I can't believe Ted just talked about this. It was my best secret. Not sure which.
No, neither confirm nor deny.
Guys, a couple things came in on the chat. One from Connor is what other data might be useful to correlate? This is when Lee just doing the population and expected clicks. I could see, Connor suggests maybe like a per capita income. I could see a multiplier I see multipliers and dividers on that data would be pretty interesting, such as you could kind of like in gambling when they do like a home field advantage
Right.
on the spread. You could do something like a per capita income, as Connor's suggestion, on certain keywords, or you could probably do that seasonal, a seasonal multiplier as
Right.
well, where as Ted said, San Diego is not going to bust pipes in the spring, but Minneapolis will,
Well,
and so you could
yeah.
multiply the clicks a certain way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are some things like if you're searching for, Adobe houses, the population's not going to be what drives that. That's definitely regional. And there are other regional things like there are certain types of roofing that are, and certain types of homes, certain types of siding, things like that do have a regional component. But within the region, like if I were doing, looking at some sort of Adobe homes in, Arizona, New Mexico, you could take just the cities and those regions and sort of correlate them to each other and to their populations to see, what's understated and what's overstated. Another one that I did a while back was looking at, I'll use an example of it, colors and apparel. If you do across various types of apparel lines, t-shirts, tank tops, those sort of things, and you see sort of what's the demand for red, yellow, blue, green, so the different colors, they tend to fall, in relative relationship. So if you can't get Google data on, running shoes, you can, potentially extrapolate it from other apparel lines. You just have to get a little creative and see, what holds up and what doesn't to kind of, get some reasonable estimators on it.
And then Thane talking about an explanation for why the ones are off on those CPCs that are 20 plus. If they're getting rid of the one, maybe it's a threshold issue, assuming they're doing the thresholds at the beginning. If not, ignore me.
Well, I think you're right. There's something there. If they're overstating some of the numbers, that's going to drive the percentage of the ones down. So to a certain extent, I think you're right. But I don't think it's a rounding error where the ones are becoming twos, because we saw the 8s and the 9s getting pumped up. Mm-hmm. So they're accidentally rounding 1s into 8s and 9s. And that's a bit more than rounding should allow.
Right.
There's another question. Aren't Bing's users generally more affluent, thus this influences their search terms? In online retail, we definitely saw that. We would get a higher conversion rate and generally at a higher average cart. The problem always was there would be a point at which adding more ad spend would not scale the conversions. Where on Google, we could always add more ad spend and generally get more conversions at whatever that rate was. So I think that would be a reason that Microsoft and Bing would want to inflate their search volume. Unfortunately, they adhered to Benford's, and I don't think they're inflating their volume. Or at least they're using the natural numbers. They're not artificially changing them by hand.
I think that would be, you could probably make that case if you were looking exclusively at electronics and fashion, which is where those numbers are significantly, it's like $500 higher per customer versus Google, but you're not. So I think you kind of took that out of that.
Yeah, and when you're looking at sort of the first one that people know is that Bing is a lot older. There's a sharp drop off under 35 in terms of younger people being represented on the Bing search, and they don't even know the damn thing exists. So there's an age component which would account for the mix, but if you look at the number of 65-year-olds that are searching on Bing, there's more that search on Google than search on Bing. There's more people with 100,000 plus income on Google than there are on Bing. So Bing might convert better because the mix is better, but in terms of raw numbers, Google is larger across the board. So when you see something on Bing that is significantly higher, it's something that you take note of. because it is a little bit of an oddity.
Yeah, and just as a disclaimer, we can't really prove much of anything with this data other than it was remarkable seeing Bing have more search volume and 1% of the CPC cost. Like, that just blew my mind. Why is this happening? How is this possible? Who's telling the truth? Who's lying? Maybe they're both telling the truth. Should Benford's apply to search volume? It's going to be hard to prove those cases definitively, and we can't. So if you want to say we're wrong, there's plenty of room for you to say we're wrong. We just found this data to be fascinating. So
The fact that we can predict where there's likely to be discrepancies based on cost per click, that means that there is something going on there. Why? We don't know. What does it mean? We're not sure. Absolutely, but it's just very compelling that, and the fact that Google has like no search volume for personal injury Chicago. Come on. That you can't sit there and say that that's true. And when you looked at it on a monthly basis, it was 12 months of zeros. Really? Is Google's data machine broken? Is their estimators not work in Chicago? I don't know, but I know that that's not accurate because I've actually done some work with personal injury in Chicago. They do have search volume.
yeah, it's it's a bizarre set of data that's definitely hard to explain. I'd be interested if there are ever any forensic accountants out there watching this episode. Contact us, let us know, are we applying Benford's right? Do you think it should apply to search volumes? We want those answers. So if your brother's a forensic accountant, maybe give them an email and ask them if that's applicable.
Right.
Surprisingly high number of forensic accountants do watch this show.
Is that in our demographic? Is that what that is?
You can see it in YouTube analytics.
Yeah,
somewhere in the back.
Well, thanks a lot. Are there any more final thoughts? Anyone have anything to report? Any speaking engagements coming?
Not from here.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone, and we'll see you next week. I'm hoping next week to do a before and after the update analysis. May still be a little bit early for that, but people want some answers, so we might as well see what we can see. So we'll try to do that for next week's episode. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.